Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching the fourth installment of our special broadcast called Namaste Trump. As always, we will revisit the India-US relationship in all its facets and dimensions, economic, strategic, cultural and people-to-people ties, so that you, the viewer, know what it takes to be on top of the news. Remember, DD India is your one-stop destination for definitive, authoritative and comprehensive coverage of US President Donald Trump's visit to India. All right, joining me in the studio are two very special guests, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Professor Sreeram Chaulia. Ambassador Prakash has had a long and distinguished career in the Indian Foreign Service. He held many positions, including that of India's High Commissioner to Canada and Ambassador to South Korea. He was also the Consul General in Shanghai and the spokesperson of the Indian Foreign Ministry. And Professor Chaulia is Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. His latest book, titled Trump, Emerging Powers in a Post-American World, was published in November last year. Right, US President Donald Trump has expressed excitement on visiting India. He told US journalists that between the new stadium and the airport in Ahmedabad, there will be 7 million people.
Well, we can have a trade deal with India, but I'm really saving the big deal for later on. We're doing a very big trade deal with India. We'll have it. I don't know if it'll be done before the election, but we'll have a very big deal with India. We're not treated very well by India, but I happen to like Prime Minister Modi a lot, and he told me we'll have 7 million people between the airport and the event. And the stadium, I understand, is sort of semi under construction, but it's going to be the largest stadium in the world, so it's going to be very exciting. But he says between the stadium and the airport, we'll have about 7 million people. So it's going to be very exciting.
Now, historically speaking, every US president since the year 2000 has visited India. It was Bill Clinton in 2000, George W. Bush in 2006, Barack Obama twice in 2010 and 2015. Donald Trump's visit to India, his first ever, would be the 5th visit to India by a US president in the last 20 years. But do you know who was the first US president in history to visit India? Well, it was Dwight Eisenhower in 1959. Richard Nixon visited India in 1969 and Jimmy Carter in 1978. Now, talking about Jimmy Carter, his visit to India was memorable in more ways than one. Just to give you an example, a village in the Indian state of Haryana was named after Carter. My colleague Urmilesh Bhatt traveled to the village called Kartarpuri on the outskirts of New Delhi. Now, these visuals are from Kartarpuri. It was located about 25 kilometers away from the Indian capital. The village used to go by the name of Daulatpur Nasirabad, but after Jimmy Carter visited the village, it was renamed Kartarpuri. As my colleague Urmilesh reports, some locals have fond memories of the Carter visit, and they're excited to hear about Trump's visit to India. All right, joining me in the studio are Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Professor Sreeram Chaulia. If I can come to you, Ambassador Prakash, first, your thoughts on the Trump visit to India and what can one expect towards the end of this historic visit?
Well, you had enumerated some of the important landmark visits of the President of the US. Now, what has changed? You mentioned the visit of President Clinton, which you recall took place after 22 years of the visit of Jimmy Carter. Now, since then, every president has been visiting US, and what has changed big time is that there is cross-party consensus in the US and India for a very strong relationship between the two countries. So, there is a trajectory of the relationship, the curve, which has been steadily going upwards, and it has become, I think, the most important relationship that we have,
right,
encompassing practically every aspect of relationship, endeavor, bilateral, regional, international issues. More than 60 dialogue mechanism, including the 2+2 at the ministerial level, which has foreign minister and the defense minister. Biggest trading partner, biggest now emerging as a very vital partner in defense and security, energy partner, I mean, you name it. So, this and the two leaders who have a very good chemistry between them, they meet 3 to 5 times a year. So, that is the background in which the visit is taking place. President Trump is the height of his popularity. He has just come out unscathed from the impeachment process, and he is visiting India in the election year. Plus, there is a very influential, vocal and respected Indian diaspora, which is more than 4 million and with close to 2 million voters. So that is the broad scenario in which President Trump is visiting India. So the very fact of his visit at this juncture, along with his spouse, along with perhaps his daughter will be coming and ministerial colleagues, is quite significant, because it continues to show the importance. It is significant in the bilateral context, regional context and international context.
Right.
And I think it will help in propelling that relationship even forward.
Indeed. Professor Chaulia, if I were to ask you to take a step back in time and reflect over the evolution of the India-US ties, at least since the last 2 decades, starting with the Clinton visit in 2000, how do you see the India-US strategic partnership shape in the last 20 odd years?
Well, Ramesh, as we just mentioned, Bill Clinton, that was the opening gambit, 2000, when he was here. And since then, it's been a bipartisan consensus indeed. And I think the overwhelming strategic content has been there, especially until Obama, because these liberal internationalist US presidents always believed in propping up India as a counterbalance to authoritarian China.
Right.
And there have been lots of arguments that the US had exercised what is called strategic generosity or strategic altruism towards rising democratic power like India, so that it can maintain the balance of power in Asia and all that. So especially so with George W. Bush and also with Obama. With Trump, it has become more bilateral and transactional. There's no question about it. That's why we are all talking about the trade deal and whether it will happen or not, and all the irritants to final settlement on that. So my assessment is that the strategic component, and especially the Indo-Pacific and the balance of power and preventing Chinese hegemony in the region, that kind of has taken a back seat, and now it's more about what the US can sell and buy from India. And in that sense, Trump by his very nature is much more of a populist politician. He is not a liberal internationalist like any of his predecessors. So he has brought in these demands, and we are trying to work it out in a way that is mutually acceptable, right? So nonetheless, I would say that the legacy of the last 20 years, especially last let's say 16 years until Trump came, is significant, and the trade irritants notwithstanding, there is still growth. I mean, the growth in trade has slowed down lately because of he withdrew the GSP preferences and such things, but and probably Trump does not have a a grand strategy or a coalition for coalition building and multilateral coalition building where India would be a linchpin. But we are fine with that, because we are not in any way happy being a junior partner to the US, because we have our own strategic vision for Indo-Pacific, and where and when we can cooperate with the US, good for both of us. If the US is not so interested in it under Trump and is focusing more on trade and immigration and those kind of nitty-gritty issues, so be it. We'll want to maintain the legacy of this and not to let it slip away. So I think cumulative gains of the last 2 decades is something worth preserving. As Ambassador was mentioning, 20 years we've reached $150 billion worth of bilateral trade in goods and services. There's a lot of technology transfer going on. A lot of our private sectors are entwined with each other. It's
Right.
not so much even the governments, the societies of both sides. Our middle classes have a lot of investment in the US. So many of them go there to study, and then there is this immigrant, the diaspora community. So it's a big relationship. Whether or not Trump has a long-term vision for this, for promoting India, nonetheless, I think it's a big relationship that we need to conserve and take forward.
All right, so you heard the opening comments from both my guests. Let me pause here to give you, the viewer, a flavor of the Trump-Modi relationship. Now, from Howdy Modi in Houston to Namaste Trump in Ahmedabad, the bonhomie between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi will add another leaf to India-US ties. Take a look at the next report.
He's a friend of mine. He's a great gentleman, and I look forward to going to India, so we'll be going at the end of the month.
President Trump reciprocating India's Namaste Trump call. This will be his first bilateral visit to India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will host President Trump in Ahmedabad as well as New Delhi on the 24th and 25th of February. The two leaders have spoken twice over the phone in 2020.
I just spoke with Prime Minister Modi, and it's going to be very, I don't know who's going, but he said we will have millions and millions of people. My only problem is, so last night we probably had 40 or 50,000 people, far more than anyone else, but when we have 50,000 people nowadays, fellas, I'm not going to feel so good, because he thinks we'll have 5 to 7 million people just from the airport to the new stadium.
Over the past 3 years, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have developed a personal rapport and met 4 times in 2019, including the historic joint address before a strong 50,000 crowd of Indian Americans at the Howdy Modi event in Houston.
It is my honor and privilege to welcome here Mr. Donald Trump. This is extraordinary. This is unprecedented. I present to you my friend, a friend of India, a great American president, Mr. Donald Trump.
Like the Howdy Modi event in Houston, Namaste Trump event will be held at the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Stadium or Motera Stadium after it is inaugurated by the US President on February 24th. Being built at an estimated cost of $100 million, the Motera Stadium, with a seating capacity of 110,000 spectators, will be the world's largest cricket stadium, overtaking the Melbourne Cricket Ground in Australia. A visit to the Sabarmati Ashram is also likely.
हमको बहुत ही आनंद है कि डोनाल्ड ट्रम्प जी भी यहाँ पधार रहे हैं और उनका अच्छे से स्वागत भी करेंगे आंटी पहनाकर.
On his first trip to the US in his second term as Prime Minister, Narendra Modi was in the US between 21st to 27th September 2019. Apart from addressing the annual UN General Assembly session, the Prime Minister held a bilateral meeting with President Trump.
Because the two leaders pull on so well together, which is very rare actually when you're looking into leaders of such different countries and such different capacities and such different mindsets, but they are totally at ease with each other, and I think that's a very important component.
Sure.
The second thing, I think it'll do wonders for both the countries. I mean, we are natural allies. We are democracies. Our people like each other. You know, and I think that's something which we need to build on.
The highlight of this visit was, of course, the Howdy Modi event in Houston. It was one of the largest ever receptions of a foreign leader in the United States. Addressing the gathering, PM Modi had hit out at Pakistan for its support to terrorism and said that India's decision to nullify Article 370 has caused trouble to those who cannot handle their own country. President Trump, on his part, vowed to protect innocent civilians from the threat of radical Islamist terrorism. From a trade deal to enhancing strategic ties and the people-to-people connect, President Trump's maiden bilateral visit to India is likely to be high on both optics and outcomes.
There are increasing convergences between India and the US and a broad basis for the relationship. So that helps the leaders also to build a closer relationship. I think President Trump is going into an election year, so some of the public events will clearly be also with a mind to his domestic constituency and how it plays out in the US.
Right. I think two areas where they converge is, one is at the Indo-Pacific, as far as we are concerned, really the Indian Ocean region.
True.
And the second is on counter-terrorism. Now, there are two absolute convergent areas where the two countries are destined to cooperate, and I think we are going to see some movement here when the talks take place.
And of course, the personal rapport between the two leaders will be there for all to see. Bureau Report, DD News.
Meanwhile, Ahmedabad is all set to welcome President Trump. Take a look at the next report filed by my colleague Meghna Dev.
President Trump reciprocating India's Namaste Trump call. This will be his first bilateral visit to India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will host President Trump in Ahmedabad as well as New Delhi on the 24th and 25th of February.
I happen to like Prime Minister Modi a lot, and he told me we'll have 7 million people between the airport and the event. And the stadium, I understand, is sort of semi under construction, but it's going to be the largest stadium in the world, so it's going to be very exciting. But he says between the stadium and the airport, we'll have about 7 million people, so it's going to be very exciting.
Like the Howdy Modi event in Houston, Namaste Trump event will be held at the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Stadium or Motera Stadium after it is inaugurated by the US President on February 24th.
When President Donald Trump will be on his maiden visit to India, Gujarat is all set to welcome him. All the posters are up. Also, there are posters of the grand stadium that is going to be inaugurated. This is going to be the world's biggest cricket stadium that is going to be inaugurated by both the leaders of both the countries, and this is going to be a grand event for which Ahmedabad is decking up. There are several billboards, also posters depicting Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Donald Trump and the First Lady Melania Trump on the posters. Also, the posters speak of the amalgamation and the meeting of two big democratic countries and all the things, all for the road show and for his different visits to different places. All of it is being kept into place, and Ahmedabad and Gujarat is all equipped to host the US President and its First Lady. With camera person Sumit Nadia, this is Meghna Dev, DD News, Ahmedabad.
All right, let me continue the discussion with my guests in the studio. Ambassador Prakash, if I can come to you now. Now, in common perception, trade and defense would be the key pillars of the India-US relationship, especially in light of President Trump's visit to India. But given the fact that the trade deal may not materialize in the next few days, are we looking at a more robust defense ties in the relationship, and also whether the Indo-Pacific might figure in the discussions in India?
Well, first of all, Ramesh, I am not so sure that the Trump deal, that the trade deal will not materialize.
Right.
I mean, this is typical standard shadow boxing that nations engage in for a variety of reasons. One, you want to lower expectations. Two, you are trying to kind of, try to send a message to each other about how important something is. So this is this all goes on, and the India and the US, and that for that matter India and in international relations, last minute deals are very, very common,
right,
where the key decision is taken by the principals at the last minute to basically demonstrate how important the relationship is, and India-US relationship is very important. So I'm betting on the possibility of a trade deal. So that is one. But this relationship is so important, and the sweep is so large that yes, I am quite sure that matters like Afghanistan, our neighborhood, which will include both our northern neighbor and western neighbor,
right,
the Indo-Pacific construct certainly should come into play, because that is one of the important pillars of the foreign policy that has been unveiled by the Trump administration. I think there should be discussions on the energy sector, because US has become a very important partner of India for energy, and
right,
we are our imports of energy products from the US, whether it is LNG or petroleum, is increasing many-fold by every year. And I guess the other aspects also, like education, like cooperation in the field of science and technology, and a whole lot of other matters will come up, because it's a comprehensive relationship, and the idea would be to take stock and impart momentum to the important facets of the relationship.
Indeed. Professor Chaulia, now there's no denying the fact that President Trump is in an election year in the US. Elections are due in November this year. So would Trump also have an eye on the Indian American community back home in the US, and would domestic politics figure in his engagements in Delhi, in India as well?
Well, very much so. For Trump, as we've been mentioning, the road show in Ahmedabad, I think that matters a lot, because he's a social media savvy politician and populist, so he wants to be glorified in front of a giant global audience, and that will then boost his image back home, no question about it. And I think he's looking forward to it, and we have played that well, because we've understood. I think Prime Minister Modi knows how important domestic politics is for Trump's in his calculus, and both the Howdy Modi and the Namaste Trump in Ahmedabad, both of these signify that. And even with trade or any other aspect of the relationship, I think Trump wants to brag back home, that I'm securing victories for our working class and for the voters. And the diaspora, the Indian diaspora, yes, traditionally, because they have been concentrated more in the coasts, on the east coast and the west coast of the US, which have been liberal bastions, they have voted more for democratic candidates in the past. And even in terms of being donors, because Indian Americans are a very high income society, community in general. They have supported democratic candidates more in the past. But I think Trump's strategy is very clear, that this time he wants to wrest away, if not all of them, at least a significant portion of them in his favor. So surely this visit will help him, in his cause. And given that incumbents have an advantage in the US system to get re-elected, and the current scenario does look promising for Trump to get re-elected, I think he will be wanting to consolidate the Indian American vote. And the same applies to other communities. In fact, unlike the image of Trump as a far right populist, what has happened, you see, in the last 6 months, he's been emphasizing more and more African Americans and Latinos who are already US citizens, and how they're all benefiting, and that he's only opposed to illegal immigration. But those who are already in the US, who are minorities, he's saying my administration has done more for them than for any others, than any other previous president. So he is certainly looking at all what in India we call the vote banks, and if the foreign policy enables him domestically for his political goals and personal goals, so be it. And in the process, if the bilateral relationship goes ahead, I think that's what our goal is. The strategic relationship should not fall by the wayside. And I think our effort has always been to convince Trump administration to take the strategic element more seriously, because the populism comes in the way sometimes, because then it's all about how much am I gaining from India and how much are they giving me. But now I think our hope is that in the long run, if whether there's a Trump second administration or not, that we want this to go on, because we will need many partners, including the US, but not only the US, in order to maintain this balance of power in Asia and to have to expand our own influence in the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. Ambassador Prakash, some people prefer a top-down approach in diplomacy as opposed to a bottom-up approach. In that context, how do you read the Trump-Modi relationship? Prime Minister Modi invests a lot of time, energy and effort into developing a personal rapport with world leaders. So how do you see the Trump-Modi relationship going on from here?
The foundation of any relationship is the confluence of interests.
Right.
And if you have a convergence of interest, outlook, strategic outlook, then on that foundation an edifice of relationship is built. So that has to be there for any relationship, and that is a solid foundation which exists for reasons that we have enumerated and others between India and the US. Now that being the case, the personal relationship between the leaders, the personal chemistry between the leaders, how they relate to each other, make a significant difference. I mean, at the end of the day, relationships are all about, between countries are also about the relationship between the principals. And Prime Minister Modi has this unique ability to forge personal chemistry that enhances the interest of your interlocutor towards a certain country. So not just with President Trump, but with the German president, German chancellor, with the Russian president, the Prime Minister of Japan, and so on. So that he has been doing, and with President Trump, he has met so many times. They have a good chemistry, and I will not be surprised if that also did play a role in President Trump coming at, and we also recall that he had invited Miss Ivanka Trump, who had come in 2017 to Hyderabad, had a very successful visit. So that is one aspect, but then at the end of the day, every leader needs to go back and demonstrate what is the takeaway for him. And for President Trump, the trade aspect, the Indian diaspora that we have spoken about, the very fact that India is located in a very strategic geography, and the Indo-Pacific reinforcement of the Indo-Pacific construct would be some of the reasons or some of the areas of his immediate interest.
Indeed. Professor Chaulia, another region of interest and concern to India is Afghanistan. Now, there's a talk of a potential US-Taliban deal in the works, and it could be announced any time now. How crucial or how significant would be an American pullout from Afghanistan and its implications in particular for India?
Well, this is one area where we are struggling to adjust in a way, because for the constant presence of NATO forces since 2001 has been one kind of a strategic assurance that the Taliban or ISIS or some of the hardline jihadist groups will not take over the country. Right now, but Trump, for the domestic political reasons, and the American public is tired of what he calls the endless wars. He is looking to withdraw and pack up and leave from many places, including Afghanistan. So for us, the question always, the dreaded word is vacuum. What happens is there is a security vacuum in Afghanistan as the NATO forces draw down, and there I think we would have wanted more involvement in this so-called peace process. But they kept informing us after the fact and exposed, because they relied more on Pakistan to bring the Taliban to the table. And I think I would like that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have a discussion on how India and the United States can still, even after the drawdown and after this agreement, continue to cooperate on checking these hardline jihadist groups. Because Trump, despite being an isolationist and wanting to step out of many long-term US interventions around the world, is also he makes a point about counter-terrorism, and especially using aerial warfare and such things, if not boots on the ground. So on that point, I think he will again probe us to contribute more to stabilizing Afghanistan, because Trump believes in vacating spaces, but then he says the regional power should take care of this. So we should treat this as an opportunity where instead of riding on the coattails of the US to solve our strategic dilemmas, now we are going to be more strategically assertive, involve other regional players, and the US should also be involved. But now I think increasingly, once the troops leave, the US strategic attention to Afghanistan will also decline, like has happened in the case with Syria or Iraq. So for us, we have much more stakes, because there Afghanistan is SARC member. We cannot allow it to fall back into the Islamic Emirate hands of the Taliban, right? So I think with the US, we would want coordination, but if Trump is disinterested or apathetic to it, we need to have our own self-reliant strategy for stabilizing and shoring up our distant neighbor.
All right, I'm running out of time, so I'll give you, Ambassador Prakash, the last word. Your expectations from the Trump visit, and where do you see the India-US ties go on from here in the next few years?
Well, I am very happy that the visit of President Trump is taking place. It is no ordinary visit. The visit of the American president at any juncture is an important development in the relationship, and particularly President Trump, given the fact that he has still a year to go, plus the chances of his coming back to office are very high. So, it signifies continuity, and certainly when there is high level attention to the visit, which is to a relationship which is very much needed, it helps in propelling the relationship forward. So I would expect that some of the minor irritants that there in the relationship will be put to rest. At least there will be greater understanding, and we will have greater convergences. Do we have time for me to comment on the issue of counterterrorism?
Very quickly, yes,
all right.
please.
Now, we also need to note here that we are large countries, we are in different geographies. Our interests converge and diverge. On the issue of terrorism, US outlook is somewhat different than India's outlook. For example, they took out Soleimani, who for them was a greater threat than Hafiz Saeed, on whom there is a $10 million bounty by the US. So that is the kind of convergence and the divergence that obtains, but well, we understand how it is, and we are
All right, on that note, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash and Professor Sreeram Chaulia, thank you so much for joining me in the discussion. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And that's a wrap on this special broadcast. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.